Well, hello, it's Liam O'Mara, and this is Virtue Signaling, my little philosophy of life channel. One thing that strikes me as a historian of ideas with one foot in the ancient world and one foot in the modern world is the degree to which we repeat a lot of the same arguments, have the same fights over and over again about, different approaches to politics, to life, to living together as people in a society. And I thought I would, as a fun way of discussing that sameness, the constant fighting over these things, the way that we repeat these certain themes, is by drawing on a little bit of ancient Chinese philosophy and using three of the approaches that kind of come out of the Warring States period: Confucianism, Taoism, and Legalism. Well, that's fascinating. The wind picked up a bit out here at the lake where I'm recording today, just for fun, to see if this will work. And suddenly the camera completely froze up. I don't know, it's weird. Maybe there's something in that it trips if it gets too loud. Who knows? I guess we'll find out. Anyway, I'm out at the lake and figured I'm going to talk about some Chinese philosophy and try to connect it to our world and our political fights, and we can see some of the constant sameness in our debates. Of course, to do that, I'm going to have to talk just a little bit about what Confucianism is, what Taoism is, all that stuff. So let's start there. Confucianism is a range of different approaches philosophically. There's a lot of conflict within the tradition and among different Confucians, but there's a few things that you can see in all of it. It's intensely practical or pragmatic. It's not really a religion in any way. It's a socio-political philosophy. It's a way of trying to figure out how to make society work better. It's worth understanding that this, like a lot of other traditions in Chinese philosophy, come out of the Warring States period, when China is broken apart into a whole bunch of different feuding duchies or kingdoms, or however you want to think about them, and they're constantly attacking each other, and people are going, what is wrong? Why are we killing ourselves? Why can't we sort this crap out and just get along somehow? And its approach to that is to make the interesting observation that to have good government, you need good people in it. I mean, go figure, if you're governed by assholes, things are going to go wrong. So, yeah. And it argues that not only do you need good people to create good government, but that good government could also create good people, that the two could somehow go together. And with that interesting observation that good people are needed for government, but that good government can create good people, you sort of see that Confucians essentially have a kind of, social engineering ethos. They want to try and improve people. And ultimately, it comes out of, and the name really comes out of Confuci, who's sort of traveling around all this time looking for a good government job, telling people, look, I can solve your problems, just, put me in government. And he's not terribly successful at that, but he is really good at attracting followers and people who are interested in his stuff and want to understand more of it. And that gets to something that's kind of radical in Confucianism, in that he opens up to students of just any social class. If you have talent, you can get into it. And I'll come back to that in a moment, because there's an up and a downside to that. Anyone can get in, but you do have to have a certain talent. So it is focusing on particular people. But the goal overall is junci, the creation of superior individuals, people who can take the broad view of things, the view from 10,000 feet, so to speak, and see all the problems and try to fix stuff, which makes it kind of elitist too. So it's interesting in that it's open to anybody, so it's not just pitched at the traditional ruling classes, but it's trying to create a different kind of ruling class, a kind of elitist meritocratic system where the smartest people, the most talented and hardworking people are in charge, and not just anyone. You do that by studying the moral leadership of the past, by going through these old classics and trying to pick out the good lessons, the good values. And there are a handful of important values that come up there. I want to mention just three of them briefly, because I'm going to deal heavily with two of them in a moment. I mean, first there's Ren. This idea of Ren is essentially a kind of of benevolence, being loyal and conscientious and respectful and kind to people, a sense of real humanness or humanity that comes through there. But then you also have li, and li is a sense of propriety, of deference, of conventionality, sort of like doing the way things have always worked. There's a kind of like hierarchical aspect to li. And then shao is the sense of filial piety, of being respectful and caring for elders. It includes the patriarchy in that, and that's sort of a holdover from earlier Chinese thought that the Confucians sort of like adopt and adapt and kind of like work into their system. But Ren and Li are both pretty important because there's a lot of contrast among the major Confucian exponents after Confucius. Confucius is, Confuci is a figure sort of like Socrates, who never wrote his own book, who spent all of his time teaching, but a lot of his ideas are sort of compiled by his students into a text, that gives us the analects. It's sort of like, Confucian said this, and Confucian said that, and, the master said this, the master said that, and it kind of collects all this material. And that provides a starting point for later philosophers to sort of dive into this. One of those that we know of, a fellow Mencius, who said, no man is devoid of a heart sensitive to the suffering of others. Well, he sort of focused on Ren and on, well, if you educate people well and you keep taxes low and you give them freedom and you're tolerant towards them, their natural human goodness comes out because humans are basically good by nature and should be trusted. And that kind of fits a sort of a liberal perspective, doesn't it? The liberal wants less government and less harassment of people, more individual freedoms and liberties there, and, tries to set up certain rights, focuses on education, and sort of assumes that, in the right circumstances, good people are going to act good, and you won't have to worry about it. But Junsi, who's also a Confucian scholar, focuses much more on Li, on establishing clear moral standards and guidelines, on basically following the rules, on kind of like a deference to authority. And that really comes out of the fact that he thinks humans are naturally kind of wicked, that we aren't naturally good, we're naturally selfish. And because we're selfish, we're going to do terrible shit to each other unless there's a strong authority kind of holding us in line. And if you think about it, that's kind of the essence of the more conservative way of thinking. This is why conservatives tend to favor hierarchies and authorities, policing powers, because you're naturally afraid that if people are left to their own devices, they're going to start robbing each other and killing each other. So you need that, and you need traditions and strong moral order to sort of hold things together. But what's interesting is that both of them share this common concept that humans can be improved. And this is sort of at the essence of what Confucianism is, that you can sort of fix people up using that stronger authority. And you can see there's an element of this in a lot of conservative thought. There's a way in which the disciplinary society is intended to shape people. Disciplinary society. Oh my goodness, I slipped in a Foucault reference in a discussion of Confucianism. Oh, wow. Weird. So this idea of setting rules and punishments and kind of like strict guidelines and whatnot is intended to shape us into the kind of subjects that society requires of us. It's sort of like the whole deterrent argument for strong punishments in criminal justice. There's a nice little, metaphor that Junsi uses about building boats. So if you think about it, boats all have like curved wood, right? To make the shape of the vessel. And trees don't conveniently grow in the right shapes for that. What you have to do is shape them somehow. So you'll take this board and you'll set it up in the little vices, and you'll boil water underneath it so the steam rises and sort of softens the wood. And you just change those cranks a little bit each day to slowly bend that wood into the shape that you want it. And then when you get it to where you want it, you take away the steam and let it thoroughly dry out, and the wood just stays in that shape. And he's sort of arguing that the state can basically soften people in a way and then provide a kind of shaping mechanism through those rules, through kind of gradually pushing people, and that will slowly change who we are. It essentially will change our natures and make people better overall, make society better overall. And you can see there's a pretty big contrast there already with Mencius, who's essentially saying, he takes the kind of like bleeding heart liberal kind of empathetic approach. People are already good. They don't have to be shaped. The problem is society is really just crushing them and pushing them and holding them down in some way. And if you just back the hell up, people will become good. And then what we can do is we can focus on just education, on giving them education, and that will make them better. That will create the superior man. Just take good people naturally and educate them. And that's a little bit closer in some ways to the Taoist perspective. So I want to throw a little bit of Taoism in there, because while Taoism differs from Confucianism in that it actually is a religion, it's also a socio-political philosophy, and it actually rises in response to Confucianism as a critique of Confucianism. I'll come back to that in a moment too. The Taoists, though, differ fundamentally in one key way from Confucians. Confucians are thinking that people can be improved, that through education you're changing who people are. And the Taoists argue that no, you can't really change who you are. People are people. They are who they are. And what you can do is you can bring out what that is. You can encourage people to be what they are. So the Taoists really are aiming for a kind of, taking a step back from things. This concept of wu wei, of disengagement, really comes from the fact that the Taoists are actually, they do have a kind of religious perspective involved. They're trying to get in touch with the way, with the Tao, which is a force that's at the center of all things, that accomplishes everything by doing nothing. So it's not like God in the sense of a directing intelligence, but there is a kind of overall force that drives things. And you can make parallels to, maybe Aristotle's unmoved mover, kind of like this primal force that starts everything out, but it doesn't have any of the personal characteristics of God or directing intelligence to it. It just is. And there's a sense in which getting in touch with that absence of directing will is sort of important. In fact, I can make a neat parallel just because I was keeping the sun off my head. So, it's a hat, right? And what makes a hat, right? I mean, is this a hat? Well, it's on my head, but it's really a phone. It's not really a hat. Right? It's not a very good hat, and it's going to fall off. So this is not a hat, but this is a hat. What makes a hat is nothing. There's an absence here. There's a hole that lets it fit on my noggin, right? That nothing makes the hat something, right? Or, think about the spokes in a bicycle wheel, right? All those gaps between the spokes. That nothing, that space, kind of makes it the wheel. And that sort of like defines it. And in that way, that nothing sort of defines the Tao. It is everything, but it's also nothing. It's just this, again, undirected force. And what you're trying to do in Taoism is to disengage from society. The pursuit of wu wei is to say, well, instead of trying to change people, instead of trying to fix things, why don't you just step the fuck back and let it be? Like, leave it the way it is. It's, in a sense, trying to get in touch with nature. And there's a parallel here with, like, the Stoics or Epicureans, who are always talking about how we need to get in harmony with nature, live in harmony with nature, with nature around us. And I mean, like, go be a hippie tree hugger sort of thing, but like, what is the actual nature of things? What does the universe do naturally on its own, and how can I do that same thing? How can I live in accordance with my own nature? Taoists are very much concerned with trying to figure out how to do that. And this is where some of their political critique comes in, where some of the arguments with Confucianism would come in. Because the Taoist, for example, would say that a lot of what the Confucians are doing is just like, it's not really fundamentally changing anything. It's just sort of a joke. Like, there's in Huang Chi tells an interesting parable about, let's see, how does it go? It's about feeding these monkeys, right? So imagine, like, I don't know, monkeys in a zoo or something. You got the zookeeper kind of like, come here to feed the monkeys. And he's been giving them 3 nuts in the morning and 4 in the afternoon for their food. And they're mad. They're unhappy. They're like, kind of, I don't know, they're flinging their poo. They're kind of like on strike. They're angry because this is not the feeding arrangement that they want. So the keeper is going to change it and, sort of instead give them, 4 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, which, if you think about it, is the same number of nuts. Like, nothing really changed. It's still 7 nuts. But because there was a change, the monkeys are happy. And they feel that you listen to them. There's an interesting psychology to that. And you can still see that, reflected in a lot of basic approaches people take to, I don't know, capitalist modernity. There was a real trend in the whole scientific management Taylorist sort of process. It starts in the late 19th and early 20th century. And businesses got the great idea that if they took polls of their workers, if they talked to their workers and asked them, what do you really want, they could manipulate them in a way. So they're going to go and they're going to have every worker like submit a little secret ballot that says they want something. And the workers are all like, I want higher pay. I want, more time off. Like, I want better working conditions. They're like, asking for really important shit. And the bosses are going to take all this big stack and they're going to ignore it. And instead create, like, I don't know, a little rec room or something, or hold a pizza party. Add an extra bathroom, some little thing that doesn't actually cost them a whole lot. And the workers are actually going to be happier coming to work because they'll feel that the bosses listened to them even though they actually didn't. Because they asked your opinion. They asked what you thought. And the workers will just assume, well, I don't know, maybe Bob and Fred and Joe, maybe they all asked for an extra bathroom break, or maybe they all wanted pizza or something, and, well, I guess I just got outvoted when I was asking for a raise. Just that simple fact of asking. And the Taoists are pointing that out. They're getting us to realize that there's a kind of like, shuffling of the deck going on when people are trying to change society, but nothing fundamentally is changing because the basic power structure isn't going to change, basic nature isn't going to change. You're just sort of assuming that it is. And instead they want you to, like, take a step back really from it. Just to pull some pieces from, like, Lao Tzu, like, a good traveler leaves no tracks, a good speech lacks fault finding, a good counter needs no calculator. It's just pointing out things are what they are, and trying to harass them and force them into a mold and change them isn't really helping. Lao Tzu is telling us that, like, when the government is sort of chill and isn't in your face trying to, like, change things, then people are kind of relaxed and they just are what they are. But if the government is always, like, setting all kinds of rules and you must do this and you must do that, then the people are like, oh, I got to follow the rules, and, they're nervous. So anxious people are going to be more problematic, and you end up with more crime and everything else. So the Taoists, in that sense, have this same view of, like, just leave people alone, that you can kind of see in, like, the Confucian Mencius, but they also lack the sense of trying to alter people's nature through education. The Taoist sage, quite different from the Confucian sage, isn't forcing people to, like, memorize texts and look for, like, the moral lessons of the past and how to emulate it and change my behavior and change who I am. Instead, the Taoist sage is trying to figure out, or help you figure out, who you are and bring that out. Because not everyone is going to be cut out for every job. But, just to think of the modern world, not everyone is going to go to college. Not everyone should go to college. Not everyone, we shouldn't want to think that they do. This is one of the critiques I have of a lot of modern liberal thought in the U.S. since the 1970s, which focuses so much on college-educated urban elites and kind of leaves behind large numbers of people. Well, not everyone's going to go to college. Education is not the solution to all of our problems. We really need to let people figure out what they're best at and what they really want to do, and value all of that. Just because, some asshole went to Harvard doesn't make him a better person than you. It just doesn't. It's different. He did something different with his life. What we need to do is help people find who they are and what they want and what they're best at, and bring that out. The Taoists try to do that. They try to get us to think that a good teacher is not finding fault and trying to critique you. The good teacher is trying to encourage who you are. I think that I would be kind of remiss in trying to draw parallels in the modern world to, more ancient Chinese thought if I left the legalists out entirely, especially since the Chinese Empire was founded on legalist principles, even when they later have a Confucian-educated bureaucracy that's sort of enforcing everything. It is ultimately legalist principles, not Confucian principles, that sort of drive Chinese centralization in the Chinese state, which, I don't know, it's always been sort of funny. I mean, they built this really elaborate Confucian education system based around like memorization of the texts, and the tests are all based around like the memorization of the text, and you're like, and what did this particular sage mean by this? And you're like, you're just mastering this work. So it doesn't prize as much innovation as it does, this kind of like rote memorization of like the really good shit that you want to pass along to people. And Confucians developed this education system that produces really disciplined, diligent, hardworking people, but then they go into a government that isn't generally run along Confucian lines, it's run along legalist principles. And the legalists are a bit different. You can see that it ultimately has the same kind of psychological bias that we saw with Junzi, the Confucian who wanted to like shape people, but it's much harsher. And you can see that in some more conservative approaches to governance, and certainly some more of the aggressively authoritarian approaches to governance will do this. You get this basic argument for deterrence, and to do that, you'll use things like collective punishment, and it has this kind of Machiavellian, like the ends justify the means sort of perspective, such that, I don't know, like, say in your office there's a bunch of workers and you want the workers to be quiet and diligently do their work in their little cubicles and not spend their time like chatting with each other and goofing around and playing on Facebook or whatever. So you set the rules: no goofing around on Facebook, sit quietly in your cubicle, not talking to your neighbors, and do your damn job. And inevitably someone is going to screw up. So you see that, I don't know, Joe is cruising through Facebook and he's found this really funny meme, this picture or whatever. He's like, hey, Mary, check it out. Look at this funny meme I found on Facebook. And the boss sees that, takes Joe into the corner where everyone can see it, and blows Joe's brains out. Bam! I'm like, whoa, holy crap. Like, you're going to learn, I'm not going to be that person. I'm not using Facebook at work again. The legalist isn't concerned with the ethical positions. It's not concerned with the morality of whether it's right to hurt this one person. They're concerned with the kind of like ends justify the means. That for them, the morality is everyone doing their thing and everyone diligently doing their work and carrying on here, and you can justify that killing in that way. Now, think about that and the way that people often justify capital punishment or execution. If it's wrong for me to kill someone, why is it okay for the government to kill someone? They're not arguing in strictly moral terms that killing is wrong. What they're arguing is that breaking the rules is wrong. There's very much a kind of fuck you, obey the law sort of like mentality here that isn't about the ethical principle of killing. It's more about following the custom, following the tradition, following the law, like what society expects of me. Don't kill people. And is perfectly willing to set an example and execute someone, sometimes in genuinely horrific ways, like, holy crap, the electric chair is really bad. But it does this as a way to say, you must follow the law or these things can happen to you. And that's really the essence, in a sense, of the legalist idea of setting very strong laws and demanding conformity to the laws. If conformity to the laws is weak, the country is weak. That's the argument. If people don't follow the laws enough, then it weakens the entire country and drags it down. And they're trying to avoid that. And you can see that again in people's arguments about they want a good, strong, powerful state, and that of course requires very strict punishments. And that's how people can kind of justify the carceral state in the U.S. Now, putting all of this together, you can see all these different perspectives in our society. You can see the very extreme kind of authoritarian, obey the law sort of mentality that you get with the legalists. And you can see the slightly softer version of that, which is trying to kind of shape people, and the ones that are like, we must follow the law and do things, but let's also have a kind of reformist capacity. Let's educate our prisoners and, shape them into something. And this is how people can justify prison work programs and prison education systems and whatnot. And also enforcing particular types of education, trying to produce the right kind of subjects. To borrow again from Foucault's governmentality, this sense of like a society fashioning the subjects that it needs. And there's plenty of liberals who are doing that. And it kind of like fits the mentality that you get with Junsi, that we're going to shape people through a combination of laws and education into the subjects that we need. The legalists aren't really concerned with changing people. They're just concerned with, fuck you, obey the law. And if you don't do it, I'm just going to kill you in some horrifying way. And it's fear that will hold things together. It's kind of like get this Moff Tarkin in your head, like, fear will keep the local systems in line. Kind of, I don't know. There's a kind of evil empire aspect to it. The Confucians are never really like that. Even when they share that same conservative perspective, there's a way in which they want to improve society, and that involves improving people, and that involves some kind of educational aspect. And then you have the more bleeding heart liberals who are, we should just give people more freedom because people are naturally good, but let's also try to encourage the best in them. And that's where you get the sort of what people sometimes call like the nanny state idea. People are drinking too many sugary drinks or whatever. We should just ban these sugary drinks here and stop them because we want to improve people. We want to shape their behaviors. If at school they're not going to get these horrifying bad for you drinks, and really sodas are bad for you, but if they can't have them at school, then it will change their behavior and they won't drink them at home. And it's going to shape you. Or the way that liberals will sometimes justify things like the drug war. Right, trying to ban people from doing certain things is going to change their behavior. But you're doing it from a very much like a drawing out the best in you, a kind of like bleeding heart way to try and like improve people. And, you get tons of like really well-intentioned attempts at putting in laws, but it still has that goal of changing who you are, of changing society. And then you really have the kind of, Taoist sort of hippie mentality that just says just step the fuck back and let it go. Just don't try to change people because people aren't going to be changed. Instead, we should just back off from this, decrease the state's power over our lives. And if we do that, then we're not going to be anxious naturally, and that goodness will kind of come out. You can see that in a lot of the more anarchist positions. Anarchists are arguing that people can work together through direct democracies and manage their own lives. They don't need somebody trying to tell them what to do and shape them into something to be good people. They just naturally kind of are good people. But in all of these, you can see a basic fight back and forth, too, between a kind of liberal versus conservative mentality, a sense that some people believe that others are naturally good and trustworthy and that you don't need the strong authorities. And you can see that with the Mencius-derived Confucian trends as well as the Taoist trends, like back off and let people be who they are. And then you can see the more conservative mentality that suggests that people are naturally kind of untrustworthy and that bad things are going to happen if you don't have strict laws and enforcement. And you can see that in the Junsi-derived Confucianism as well as in legalism. It's this basic breakdown between these two poles, that people are good or people are bad. People are trustworthy, people are untrustworthy. And that basic division fits so much of our political philosophy over literally thousands of years, not just today in our lives or in ancient China in the Warring States period and the imperial period or whatever, but you can see it reflected in traditions all over the place, whether you're talking about legal arguments in ancient Rome or in medieval Europe, or in South Asian philosophy. I mean, there's always this struggle. And people's perspectives are shaped by whether they're on one side or the other of that basic divide. Are they a person who thinks that people are naturally good and trustworthy and you want to bring that out? Or are they a person who's naturally fearful of difference, of other people, and want to control things and establish strict norms and legal requirements and whatnot because you're afraid of what people will actually do? And it's very difficult, I find, for people to step out of one side or the other and understand the other side, because they're both moral philosophies. They're both positions that do come from a kind of moral center and a particular moral argument, but one side often looks at the other as if they're somehow crazy. Like, how can you think that? Why would you? That makes no sense. Try to explain to conservatives the whole idea of prison abolition. Yeah, let all the prisoners out. Don't do this at all. Like, it doesn't actually work. Try to explain that to somebody who comes from that more conservative perspective that thinks you need the laws and the punishments and whatnot in order to regulate society. Or conversely, try to explain to the very liberal, sort of trusting sort of person that you need to lock up X number of people in order to solve a problem, or, build walls or this or that. Try to explain that to them. I mean, we often just talk past each other. And it really comes from being rooted in one or the other of these two major trends, two major approaches to this question of human nature, who people really are. And I think that if we can see that battle playing out over and over and over again in our intellectual history, then maybe it should tell us it's time to sit the hell down and really talk to each other, learn to empathize across that basic divide, and figure out how we can work this out and live together if people have these differing perspectives on a really fundamental issue. So anyway, there's my little video kind of connecting some ancient Chinese philosophy to some of our modern debates, and hopefully you got something out of this. Again, I'm Liam O'Mara. This is Virtue Signaling. If you like this kind of crazy content, just hit the little like and subscribe, and maybe support me on Patreon, and you'll get more of this kind of stuff. So have a great day.